Hi everyone. This is going to be a quick refresher on how to write a good thesis statement for AP History essays. Now, just keep in mind that this presentation is going to go over just AP Histories in general. So, the same techniques you're going to see here apply to AP US History, AP Euro, and AP World History. Although the sample topics we're going to base our thesis statements on are going to be derived mostly from AP World. So, the same techniques, though, will apply across all of the AP History exams. So let's go into what a thesis statement actually is. A thesis statement does a few things. Now, first of all, it's required for both the document-based question and the long essay question essays. And in the rubric for each of those essays is worth 1 point. Now, keep in mind that every point in the essay rubrics is mostly independent from other ones. So if you don't have a good thesis statement, you can still go and get some other points as well for context, for using evidence to support arguments, and so on. But a thesis is something that will kind of set the stage for a really good, solid essay in the long run. Now, the introduction must appear in the introduction or conclusion paragraph. It can't be mixed in with your body paragraphs. There has to be a clearly defined introduction or conclusion where your thesis is going to be located. And it can be in either, because if you just kind of like start writing based on what you are thinking of in your head without really sort of planning out and outlining and coming up with a thesis ahead of time, you might sort of see a shape of your thesis come together as you're actually writing the essay, and then you can just put it in at the end in order to sum up what you've actually written over the course of your essay. Now, a thesis has to present a historically defensible claim in response to the prompt. What historically defensible means is, can this argument be supported using actual factual evidence from history? Or, on the other hand, if it's historically indefensible, that means that you simply just can't find evidence to support it. It's just not a true statement. So if you had a thesis saying that, the Mongols conquered every single country on Earth and made everyone on the planet their subjects, that's not historically defensible. That's just a wrong thing because it didn't happen, and the evidence about this particular issue does not show that that particular thing happened. So, now, your claim has to establish a clear line of reasoning. This means you can't just say, there were many positive effects of the birth of agriculture. You need to say, like, what some of those effects are that show you that your statement is true. So essentially, include in your thesis some specific details that show you the evidence you're going to be laying out that actually brought you to that conclusion in the first place. Establish a line of reasoning. And your thesis is going to use a historical thinking skill. So it's going to be focused around causation, so explaining cause and effect as it relates to the prompt, comparison, or change in continuity. Some prompts that we're going to see will clearly indicate one particular thinking skill to emphasize. Others might not, and it's kind of up to you to see what thinking skill comes out of the evidence that you're considering for that prompt. And we're going to look at an example of this. So, your thesis then should be a table of contents or a roadmap where the grader can look at it and say, these are the arguments this person is going to be defending and substantiating and including evidence for over the course of his or her body paragraphs. That's what we mean by a table of contents. Like the chapters in your book are the arguments you put in your thesis. It should not simply restate the prompt. You need to really show that you understand what the question was even asking, and then present a line of reasoning in response to that. You should include specific ideas that are tied together in a logical way. Now, sometimes you'll find that it really makes sense to do, claim versus counterclaim. So, despite the fact that there were many differences, all of these things were also similar about these two subjects. But as long as the arguments you're making are tied together in a logical way, and it sort of flows and creates a narrative about the subject, then you'll be good. You should avoid vague, general, or substance-free statements. We'll look at some examples. So now we're going to look at a few sample thesis statements in response to a couple of sample questions. Our first sample question is, develop an argument that evaluates the effects of the invention of agriculture on human life. Pretty straightforward. This is a causation prompt that indicates the historical thinking skill you need to use: causation, cause and effect. What were the effects of agriculture on human life? Number one, a really important effect of the invention of agriculture was the amount of food. This is unacceptable. So even though it tries to make a reference to the amount of food and it links it to the invention of agriculture, there's no explanation here of what the effect on the amount of food was or why that was important in some way. This is really just a bad piece of writing. Number two, the most significant effect of the invention of agriculture on human life was that people who relied on agriculture were free from disease and lived happier lives than hunter-gatherers. This is unacceptable because it's not historically defensible. It's impossible, based on the evidence about this topic, to say that people who relied on agriculture were free from disease. Obviously that's nonsense because, we still have diseases now. And it's impossible to say that people who relied on agriculture lived happier lives than hunter-gatherers. We simply just can't say that. There's just not evidence showing us that. So this is an example of something that's not historically defensible. Number three, a very significant effect of the invention of agriculture was that the amount of food humans could produce began to increase. So I accidentally left out a word there, but this is acceptable, but barely. It establishes an argument and refers to a specific effect, although there's not really any further elaboration. But it makes an evaluation. This was a very significant effect, the fact that the amount of food humans could produce began to increase. This is okay. Number four, the important effects of the invention of agriculture included population growth, social inequalities, accelerating technological development, and the emergence of patriarchal social hierarchies. This is good. This is acceptable. Could be better. It identifies several specific effects of agriculture, lines of reasoning, but the evaluation, it doesn't sort of evaluate among them or try to say like which one's the most important or might have led to the other ones happening. So this is good, and it's a sort of basic evaluation, but it's not really anything too sophisticated. Then finally, the most significant effect of the invention of agriculture was that, due to increasing food surpluses, the population of humans on Earth began to grow. This growth, in turn, led to other significant changes such as greater specialization of labor, technological development, and complexity of human societies. This is really excellent for a couple of reasons. Number one, it makes a very sophisticated evaluation, and it basically decides like which of these was the most important effects, and it also draws a line of causation among different effects. It says the first thing that happened was because food surpluses grew, the population of humans got bigger, and then that led down this path toward other effects. So it's not just saying the important effects were, it's this was the most important effect, and here's why, because all of these other things happened as a result of that. So this is really, really good and sophisticated, but keep in mind, you don't have to have that level of complexity to get the point. But this is really the best example of a top-notch thesis that we've got so far. Now we're going to look at sample question 2. Develop an argument that evaluates the methods used to expand and organize empires during the period 600 BCE to 600 CE. So this is the classical era, and some of the big empires during this time were the Persian Empire of the Achaemenid dynasty, the Roman Empire, Alexander's Hellenistic empire that briefly existed, the Qin dynasty in China, the Han dynasty in China. And this prompt doesn't clearly indicate one specific thinking skill. So it's kind of up to you to decide, like, okay, well, how did these empires expand and organize? And then focus on, well, what were the similarities and differences? Or what were the effects? Or what were changes in continuities over time within those? And basically put together an argument based on some thinking skill as it relates to this. So, thesis number 1. Empires used many important methods to expand and organize themselves between 600 BCE and 600 CE. This is unacceptable. It does not establish any specific line of reasoning. It is simply a restatement of the prompt. You cannot rely just on this. You must give more lines of reasoning, more specifics in the thesis. Next, empires between 600 BCE and 600 CE used many similar methods of expansion and organization. Most empires relied on building a centralized bureaucratic government that enforced the law, collected taxes, and promoted production and trade. This is good. This is acceptable. It makes an evaluation, and it establishes specific lines of reasoning based on comparison. This is very clearly saying, here are the things that empires kind of had in common as it relates to their expansion and organization. That's really good. Number 3 is excellent. Most empires between 600 BCE and 600 CE, such as the Persian, Roman, and Han empires, used similar methods to expand and organize. They all relied on superiority in the organization and technology of their military, the construction of infrastructure to promote defense and trade, and the use of a bureaucratic centralized government. However, there were significant differences in the ways in which these empires each treated the peoples that they conquered while expanding. This is really good because it makes a complex evaluation of the evidence that establishes specific lines of reasoning. So it does comparison, but it isn't just looking for similarities. This also found some differences, essentially a counterclaim to the similarities, and worked that into the thesis. And if this is what the evidence shows you about the topic, then go with it. Number 4. Empires between 600 BCE and 600 CE, such as the Roman and Han empires, generally relied on similar methods to expand and organize, including the creation of centralized governments, promotion of production and trade, and development of a powerful military. These methods usually had the effect of increasing the amount of food and goods produced within their borders, as well as stimulating the exchange of technology, religions, and languages across different regions of the world. This is really, really good. It establishes clear lines of reasoning, and incorporates multiple historical thinking skills. So this actually starts with comparison, and then the person writing this thought, well, you know what, based on all of these methods that these empires are using, that actually led to these other effects happening of more exchange, more production, more religions and languages spreading across different regions of the world. It actually goes into causation as a sort of after effect of the similarities that are found through comparison. So all of these skills coming together make a really complex and good thesis. But once again, this is not the required level of complexity, but this is a really, really good thesis. So now let's look at sample question 3. Develop an argument that evaluates the extent to which the lives of Paleolithic hunter-gatherers differed from the lives of Neolithic farmers. So now this is once again giving you a specific thinking skill to really focus on, comparison in this case. So, number 1, there were many differences between Paleolithic and Neolithic humans. Among them is the way that people lived during each era. This is unacceptable. The line of reasoning is too vague. The way that people lived during each era could mean so many different things, and you really need to be more specific about what particular aspects of the way that people lived were different if you're going to go down this path. So this is not acceptable. Number 2, there were many differences between the lives of Paleolithic and Neolithic humans. For example, Paleolithic humans used stone tools, while Neolithic humans depended on agriculture and had hierarchical societies. This is unacceptable. Even though this is more specific than in number 1, the differences that are referred to are not thematically related to each other. So, if you're going to do a comparison, it needs to be a comparison between facts on each side of the comparison that are of the same category or thematically linked in some way. So if you're going to say, for example, Paleolithic humans use stone tools, you would then need to compare that to Neolithic by thinking about what kind of materials the Neolithic people used for their tools. Did they also use stone? Did they use some other materials, metals perhaps? So that's a direct comparison. But you can see stone tools in the case of Paleolithic humans are not related to, depending on agriculture or having hierarchical societies in the case of the Neolithic people. So this is an invalid comparison, and therefore it's not a good line of reasoning. So now numbers 3 and 4 are both really excellent. They make clear evaluations about the extent to which life differed between these two types of people, and they base them on thematically related details. So number 3, there were numerous Vast differences between the lives of Paleolithic humans and Neolithic humans. Paleolithic societies were characterized by small nomadic egalitarian groups who depended on hunting and gathering wild foods in order to survive. So that's the stuff about Paleolithic societies. Neolithic humans, on the other hand, developed agriculture through the domestication of plants and animals, which led them to settle in one place and grow in population. So, it takes the facts you mentioned for Paleolithic societies and basically thinks, what was it like in those particular categories or themes for Neolithic humans? And then we'll make those direct comparisons. Number 4, the invention of agriculture led to many significant differences between the lives of Paleolithic and Neolithic humans. Compared to Paleolithic hunter-gatherer societies, Neolithic farming societies were more dependent on agriculture, more hierarchical, and more technologically sophisticated. So, this is good because it clearly evaluates, the differences, and it's focusing on particular themes and making direct comparisons between Paleolithic and Neolithic in each case. So, that's a good thesis. A few more thoughts about thesis statements before we close out. Number 1, although the samples we looked at specifically dealt with LEQ prompts, the same guidelines and expectations can apply to Dbq thesis statements as well. So you need the same level of detail, except in the case of a Dbq, the evidence you're basing your evaluations and thesis on are mostly from the documents, rather than just your knowledge. Next, write a thesis statement, no matter how many or how few examples and lines of reasoning you can establish for the prompt. So even if you really only come up with like one argument or one claim in response to the prompt, write a thesis statement where you lay that out and you give a couple of specific pieces of evidence to back that up, because you want to make sure that you're still getting that point, even if you aren't writing the most sophisticated or deep knowledgeable essay in the world. Get the point. Make an attempt at the thesis. Then finally, if you write a thesis in your introduction, but then as you're writing, you think of more arguments or more lines of reasoning, more evidence that you didn't plan for as you're writing your body paragraphs, that's what the conclusion is for then. Rewrite your thesis, make it stronger and more reflective of what you actually put in your essay. So, I hope this has been helpful and good luck on the exam. Bye.